It would be best if employers were to provide a background on like the days being specific to mental health. That would create an ability to request time off so that people don't have to disclose that situation to their manager. They can just simply say, I'm requesting mental health days. There's no more questions about it. It'd be great to start putting mental health as a bucket of itself.
Welcome to this week's As Unexpected podcast, when we talk to C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists about how they lead into the future when the future generally goes as unexpected. I'm Scott Marshall, your host, and my own professional experience has made me a believer that it's not how you show up when all goes as planned, but it is how you show up when things go as unplanned. Given all of their experiences, each of our guests has become very attuned to the fact that the future is not to be predicted. My hope is that this podcast can help all of you become better leaders by building the core leadership capabilities for leading in an uncertain world. I'm so excited to welcome to the As Unexpected podcast, TK Andrews. TK, thank you so much for joining. I'd love for our audience, first of all, just to hear about you, your current role, your professional background before we get into the deep content of the podcast.
Sure. Thank you. Well, it is great to be here. My name is Kuki Andrews. I go by TK. It's Kuki. I got it as a nickname that I developed in volleyball, a sport that I really love. But my background kind of starts in Dallas. So I originally came up in a suburb of Dallas, had a wonderful experience in high school, decided that I wanted to go and take on some other adventures in life. I decided to attend University of Virginia. I got my bachelor's degree, attended semester C twice and had a great opportunity there and in order to see the world, broaden my horizons culturally as well. And then I ended up going into nonprofit work where I worked more on the stakeholder side of business. So I kind of got a good feel for what I liked in the business world, what I didn't like. And then I decided that I wanted to go to business school. So I ended up going to Simon Business School in Rochester, New York. Went there for about 2 years, learned as much as I could about strategy, leadership, finance. And I ended up working at Citi now, where I was in a rotational program. I've been able to rotate through some exciting divisions of work. So I've worked on digital components, I've worked in compliance, and I've worked on governance. And now I'm in my current role where I'm focusing more on the regulator side of business. And it's just been a great opportunity to kind of expand my skill set just across a very broad financial services industry.
Awesome background. I first want to go a little bit of a tangent because there's something here, a connection between us. I was not a volleyball player, but I was a basketball player, and that essence of team just becomes part of our DNA. I am curious what you really pulled away professionally from your team sport experience.
I guess my team sport experience has been all across the board. You know, when you're first starting at the adolescent stage, you're learning the basics, the fundamentals. You kind of get into the strategy side a little bit later in your career. But really, it's about those fundamentals. And I think one of the things that has kind of stuck to me in terms of what I've learned from coaches and what I've learned from people who have also guided me along the way is you focus on the very simple aspects first. And then you kind of branch into the strategy side. My experience from sports has been, I started off as a setter. And then I ended up going from setting to being really great at passing. So I ended up going to DS special work, which is defensive specialist. Then from there, I ended up becoming a libero because my passing was really, really good. So I constantly was adapting my skill set along the way. And so that's something that I kind of learned how to play all types of positions within the sport. So I think that kind of explains where I am now in compliance, is having to kind of wear many hats.
Yeah, that's a great connection from your sports experience to your professional experience. I love that. Uh, whether good or bad, I became tall early and was placed down in the block fairly early in my career. I loved to be outside if I could, but I didn't have as many opportunities as you did to move into alternate positions. But I always reflect on my experience in sports and the value of team, understanding one's role um, as you contribute to the overall goal, which in sports is to win. So thanks so much for that. So, of course, the title of this podcast is As Unexpected. And certainly in my experience in my current role, I have fully embraced the idea that my work and our team's work has to always be prepared for what is unexpected. And I'm curious, in your own professional experience, if you have any great stories to tell about how you have shown up as a leader, someone in the practice of leadership, when things have gone as unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about the first level of conflict that I ever experienced when I had my first corporate job. I was in the nonprofit industry, and part of being a nonprofit is you're typically asking people for donations, providing a level of service, and there's a certain level of expectation when you're providing within the different bands that we have for expectations, right? So let's say you have a gold member or you have a silver something for donations. I ended up working in a very small nonprofit. So, it's very family oriented. And I ended up coming into a situation where there was someone who wasn't necessarily delivering to the level that I felt we needed to deliver, especially when it comes to membership engagement, how we're treating our members. It got a little to a point where I had to then escalate to another manager the behaviors. That was definitely a friction point. But I think it was something that needed to be called out, right? You're asking people who are taxpayers for money. Then you're asking additional money from donors. And then there's just a certain level of expectation, and it's a reflection of us. It's a reflection of the organization, and it's a reflection of how we do business. And I felt it was something that needed to be escalated. It was definitely one of the weirdest parts of my career because it was someone who was slightly older than I am. And that always comes at such a rocky, a rocky conflict, because then you have a younger person telling you that you're not necessarily behaving in a way that you feel is professional. But I think it's an important conversation to have when it comes to being a leader. No matter what role you're in, you have a certain level of duty to the firm that you work for. And I uphold those values no matter where I am.
That's such an interesting example, particularly as now you're leading team. And how then do you show up to make sure that others have the courage to voice their thoughts around performance of their peers? Because that's a risk you took.
Yes.
Right? You were willing to take that risk. You had the courage to take action when the outcome was uncertain. Mm-hmm. And of course, you want your team members to have similar measure of courage in those circumstances. So how do you show up to provide that environment?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, so in my current role at Citi, I was in a rotational program. I then ended up becoming engaged on the council role, which was being more in the HR and program management side of things. So really hearing the leaders and what they wanted from us, and trying to cultivate that sort of culture into the program as well, but also trying to give feedback. There have been many committees that I've been a part of. So right now I'm currently looking at getting engaged on a learning and development committee for our early career talent pipeline that we're trying to create. And so there, I feel like there's a time and a place to provide the feedback. I don't think that it helps anyone to just complain, just to complain. I was told very early in my career some very sage advice of don't just come to your manager with problems, come with solutions that show that you've kind of thought things through as best as you could. And so
Yeah.
I tend to put that same thought process into the projects that I take on when I'm at work as well, is where can I actually provide, actual advice, and where can I actually provide guidance in places where either I've struggled or I've heard others have struggled.
That's great. I have a fairly simplified leadership model myself, and one of the core aspects is this idea of courage. Really is having the open will to take action when you're in an uncertain or ambiguous environment. When you describe your whole journey from a small suburb in Dallas to UVA to semester at C to Rochester, now back in Dallas, to me, you are exemplifying much of what I speak about in terms of courage. Can you give our listeners a sense of where did that come from for you? And then how does it show up today? But where is that source of that courage? It's clear that you have it. Where did it come from?
I think it's just, I've always questioned things and processes, and always wanted to kind of figure things out, but not necessarily through the lens of, someone at the front of a room telling me something. I wanted to experience it for myself. And so I've always had an interest to explore the world, explore other cultures outside of my own. And I use that sort of, especially semester at C, as sort of that pilot test to kind of see, where will I go? What is out there? And I think the more that I started seeing that connection in the world around me, the more I was feeling as though I had that courage for a reason. So it felt more purposeful for me, in the sense of, I'm interested in leadership. I'm interested in business. I'm interested in, all of these aspects. And while my path certainly isn't the most conventional, it's something that I definitely think it requires courage, right? And somehow it does make sense in the end. I think as we move towards this new realm of the new leaders that are coming in, having those different backgrounds is well within, I think, where the leadership space is going. You need people who are able to do different things and wear those many hats. So I think it does kind of lend itself to where we're going in leadership today.
Yeah, that's a great sort of turn in another direction that I'd love to explore with you. This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program for college students and adults on career breaks, sabbaticals, or retired, interested in learning and exploring the world together. Learn more about the Lifelong Learner program at www.semesteratc.org. So there was a recent article in The Economist talking about Gen Zoomer, right? Gen Z. And clearly you are working with Gen Z. I am a far distance from Gen Z, but I have two Gen Zers in my home. And the article basically was saying that there is actually reasons to be optimistic about Gen Z. We get hooked on a lot of the negative stereotypes, concerns, legitimate, around mental health, screen time. But the article also talked about the group that they're using drugs far less, they're drinking less, they're not engaging in teenage promiscuity as much, they don't party as much. Like, there's some seriousness in this group as well. So I'd love for you to give your sense to our listeners about what you're seeing move as this generation is getting set to really populate the workforce. What are you seeing?
I am seeing, I mean, and this may be controversial, I don't see Gen Z as a threat. I see them as a great ability for us to now shift the lens in what we think is the norm. I think that it's great to challenge the system, and I think that it's great that they have that courage to do so. They're all so, I find Gen Z fascinating. They're all so, I guess, unified in some of their concerns. They're very much they're very sure of who they are. I find that to be refreshing, because I think without those challenges, how will we ever adapt? I think it's great to challenge the system. It's great to want to, put in the work notices that are, I know there's jokes about the work notices that come out from Gen Z, where it's like they typically don't respond to work during the hours that they're off. And Why is that so controversial? I'm not quite sure. But I think that this ethic of always working and feeding the fire that we kind of have towards the world that we've created, it's good to contest that.
I love that you're bringing that up. This has been one of those things for someone who's, again, of the older generation. I was certainly raised with an ethic that work is, primary. You put a ton of time into it. It doesn't really stop. And I, to your point, have found this so refreshing to have a younger generation force me, who's been in the workforce for over 30 years, to rethink this. How do I make sure that I'm showing up for my kids and my wife and my family and my friends and my community, and not make this thing I do occupy my mental, emotional space at all times? So that is an excellent point. And I think you're right. They have voice, they have unification, and they have the ability to really alter how we approach so many issues that we're dealing with. So thank you for bringing that up. Related to that, I'm curious, what in your current role do you see as the future, knowing that we can't predict it? So what do you see coming along that you'll have to deal with, but you'll also have to learn as you're dealing with it, because it's going to be new. It's going to be a bit unpredictable. What are you seeing on the landscape within the larger Citi organization, an $80 billion company, and your role within that very large company?
Yeah, I see it today, Scott. I'm going to be honest. I already see the wheels turning in some of the older staff's concerns, which is that of coming into the office, right? We're currently on a hybrid model. There is very much a point of contention between the generations as to why there's a hybrid model. Why isn't there a remote model? I am still in that weird crux of I'm a millennial. So I understand the analog days. I also understand the digital age. So my thought process is, I would love to be in a remote scenario, but I think hybrid is actually the way forward. I think there have been some companies that have done a great job of this. McKesson is one that I've heard of lately, where they agree to 1 week a month that they go into the office, and the other 3 weeks they're working remote. I know Citi currently there's 2 days in the office. You work with your manager to determine those days. But I see the problems as they will as the generations continue to move forward. And I am potentially a manager, where there's someone who's like, I don't want to come into the office, right? I think I've thought about it, and I think about the situation, from where I am today as a young person. I have so many things that I'm interested in completing. There's leadership, there's other things. And so I think when you start looking at resumes and selecting who you're going to have on your team, when you start thinking about grabbing people who are active in their community, like myself, they're going to have competing priorities as well as the work. And so you have to be willing to move within that space, regardless of, I need your presence in the office. Ask yourself, why is this person asking for no presence in the office? What are they going through personally? And so I think that thinking of people as a person first is going to be the move in the workforce that we're looking at, the shift going to.
Yeah. So I have to pause and absorb all of what you said and reflect on it for myself. Because when we were trying to figure this out for ourselves, a small organization, small nonprofit organization, how were we going to approach this? I come from a generation where you were in the office every day. And of course, they would talk about the superfluous nature of water cooler talk and, inefficiency that comes from it. And I would also say getting to know someone, speaking to them, knowing them deeper, as you said, the whole person, I still feel, I can't let go of it, is better in person. that you have more grace, more sympathy, more compassion for people when you understand the whole person, and that whole person is understood better when you spend time with them. Anyway, so you're so spot on, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it unfolds. We're hybrid. We made the decision that we're not going to require time in office. I come in every day because maybe I'm just of that generation, but the dogs bark too much at home as well. So this is my pattern. But we now can hire a more diverse group of people, a more highly qualified group of people, by saying, stay where you are, and we're going to have 2 in-person all staffs per year. And we're going to build connectivity through those 2 all staffs. I'm not saying it's a perfect model. I'm just saying it's what we do now.
Right.
Yeah. So this really moves right into, when you're talking about whole person, right into the topic that 2 of my favorite people in the world brought up. Kuki and Kam really have this focus on wellness, and they bring it up. And I'd like to turn it over to them to pose a question to you. Here's Kuki and Kam.
So mental health is a very prevalent topic, particularly among Gen Z. I'm curious to know, how do you feel about offering mental health days in addition to sick days for people to invest in self-care and recover from potential mental health issues they might be struggling with? And I'm also curious, do you feel these should be paid or unpaid? So what are your thoughts on that, Cameron?
Cookie, I think that's a great question. I'm a big believer in the idea that wellness is wellness, and that, your mental wellness should be covered under a standard sick leave and, wellness policy. At the same time, I also don't believe a company should limit someone's, wellness or sick days. That might be considered a hot topic, but I'm curious what others think.
So, TK, what do you think about Kuki and Kam's question?
I think it's a great question. I tend to think about my own struggles with mental health throughout my journey of first awareness. I didn't have an awareness for my problem until I was around 25. Things started to kind of hit towards sort of like almost they bubbled over a little too much for me. And I think when I think about the space of where mental health is going, I think it would be best if employers were to provide a background on like the days being specific to mental health. I think that would create an ability to request time off without having to say why the time off is happening. I think sick is just far too general. When people say sick, they tend to want an explanation. For, not necessarily that they can ask an explanation, but it does put the person who's in the mental health space a little in an awkward, sort of moment to say, I need a moment to myself to take away from work. So I do like the idea of bucketing days into mental health so that people don't have to disclose that situation to their manager. They can just simply say, I'm requesting mental health days. There's no more questions about it. When you ask for sick time off, people say, oh, I'm so sorry for your sickness. And they come back, are you feeling better? And it's like, I don't really want to get into the conversation that kind of follows up as to what the symptoms were, things of that nature. So I do think it'd be great to start putting mental health as a bucket of itself.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And again, it goes to that whole person. We have made what I think is a simple change, but I also think it can have a profound implication. And that is, we simply call it wellness leave.
Nice.
We don't specify because, as you have explained very well, we're an interconnected system. And what may be surfacing for me or for you or for others as a mental health is linked back to our own physical health. And similarly, anything doing with our physical health can end up surfacing as a mental health. And it's almost a bit of an artificial separation. And if we can create a perspective that is about the whole person, the better off we're going to be.
I completely agree.
Yeah. And I would just say, again, this is me trying to show up in the practice of leadership, listening to others, because this is not something I had in my own lens. So it's listening to people who really bring that lens and then making the changes and supporting that. So TK, this has been awesome. We're almost to the end of this podcast. I would love it if we finish this off by you sharing how you want that one piece of advice to resonate with people around how they should show up when life goes as unexpected.
When I think about the unexpected, I typically try to plan. I am a planner. I'm very type A. You don't go to business school without being a little type A. But one thing that I would like people to start thinking about is thinking of us as humans first, and jobs second. I tend to find, the first question when you're getting to know someone is, what do you do? And I find that to be a little limiting, right? We're not limited to what we do. We're more than that. We're how we show up. We're a whole person. And I tend to think about people as humans first and person first. And then I think of the other things that come after that. And I think that when we start doing that, we'll start understanding why the behaviors are occurring within the people that we work with, the people that we interface with. I think it kind of creates that human level of compassion for someone else other than yourself, right? We all deal with our own problems, but we're not unique in our own struggles, right? Like everybody else is struggling with something else. It's a closed bag. We won't ever know. But I think it's important to think about that first.
What else could I add to that? That's a beautiful ending. Really, the compassion is the place to start understanding the whole person, and really asking questions that allow people to feel safe and open to revealing their self. So that is a beautiful ending. Thank you so much for your time, TK. I hope to see you in Dallas relatively soon, and be well.
Thank you, Scott, for having me.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program where students visit 10 countries on 3 continents, all while taking 3 to 4 college classes through Colorado State University. See course offerings and upcoming voyage itineraries at www.semesteratsea.org. Thank you for joining this week's episode of the As Unexpected podcast. The viewpoints and opinions of featured guests do not necessarily represent those of the Institute for Shipboard Education or Semester at Sea. Hit the like button, share it with your colleagues, family, and friends, and remember, be curious, be compassionate, be courageous. That's what it takes to lead as unexpected.